I've lived with type 1 diabetes for 25 years and I started taking Ozempic 1 year ago. People with type 1 should absolutely have the opportunity to use drugs like Ozempic. I'm not your usual candidate for Ozempic. I'm not struggling with my weight. I don't have type 2 diabetes. I have type 1. So why would I benefit from Ozempic? Ozempic works in a few ways. Right now, the media likes to say that Ozempic simply just makes you not want to eat food, but it's a lot more complicated than that. For a person with type 1 diabetes, Ozempic can actually decrease your insulin needs by telling your liver to produce less sugar. All day long, your liver is producing sugar, and people with type 1 actually overproduce sugar because there's a whole bunch of hormones that we don't produce properly besides insulin, and we were only given insulin when we were diagnosed with type 1. Ozempic helps your body compensate for those other 5 hormones that you don't produce normal amounts of. And those hormones regulate things like how much sugar your liver produces, how hungry you feel throughout the day, how full you feel when you're eating, and your general sensitivity to insulin. Those hormones also regulate how quickly your body digests the food you eat, and then how quickly that is emptied into your bloodstream, spiking your blood sugar after you eat. So Ozempic actually plays a huge role in helping someone manage type 1 diabetes if you can get your hands on it. That's a whole nother issue. I wanted to start Ozempic because at some point in my mid-30s, I started experiencing more and more insulin resistance. And with that insulin resistance meant that I had to take a little bit more insulin. Just these small increases in my long-acting insulin dose. Those increases meant that it was harder to manage my weight. If you need more insulin, that means there's more glucose to deal with. That insulin is going to take that extra glucose and store it as body fat, which made it harder and harder for me to maintain my weight, even though nothing else in my life had changed. I exercise every single day. I eat a mostly very clean diet. I pay attention to my health, pretty close attention. So why were these things changing? Why was I facing insulin resistance? So you could chalk it up to perimenopause or old age at 35 years old. Whatever it is, it was beyond my control and it was frustrating. So I tried to do something about it. Of course, it wasn't easy to get Ozempic. First, my insurance wanted me to try metformin, and I did. I still take metformin today. Metformin is not as powerful as Ozempic, but it can have a big impact and it's very safe. It's been around forever. So if your body tolerates metformin well, which really just means if you don't have really uncomfortable digestive side effects from metformin, metformin can help address some of the same things that Ozempic does for you, like increasing your sensitivity to insulin, telling your liver to produce less sugar, decreasing your overall insulin needs. But Ozempic is more powerful. Another symptom I was having that was getting really frustrating was my dawn phenomenon blood sugar rise in the morning. Dawn phenomenon is not just insulin resistance. It's all those hormones in the morning telling your liver to release extra glucose. I don't ever remember having trouble with dawn phenomenon when I was younger, but in the last few years, my dawn phenomenon spike has become more and more dramatic. At 6 a.m., I can wake up with a blood sugar of 90. By 7 a.m., my blood sugar was 250. That's a crazy spike in just 1 hour, and it was all because of those dawn phenomenon hormones. Guess what? Metformin and Ozempic suppress dawn phenomenon. Both tell your liver to produce less sugar. Okay, when I first started taking Ozempic, I was on like maybe 13 units of long-acting insulin a day. I started taking the smallest dose of Ozempic that you can take, 0.25. Now, I wasn't using Ozempic to lose weight. It's more like Ozempic was going to help make it easier to simply maintain my goal weight and my insulin doses and that insulin resistance and that spike in the morning that was getting more and more dramatic for no reason. Within 2-3 days, I absolutely saw the impact of Ozempic on my insulin needs. I needed an immediate reduction in my long-acting insulin dose. I needed another reduction maybe 2 weeks later and another reduction a few weeks after that because I was losing weight. The first reduction in my insulin dose was because it's immediately telling my liver to produce less glucose. Then the other reductions come really because you're eating less food because of how Ozempic affects your appetite. Because you're losing weight, you're eating less food, and you're producing less glucose. All of these things mean you need less insulin. These are all good things, except I really had no appetite for the first month, maybe the first 2 months that I was on Ozempic. I could easily forget to eat and I felt full very quickly. It's not like I completely stopped eating, but I was eating a lot less. Metformin had already cut my insulin needs for meals down. Ozempic absolutely reduced how much insulin I needed for food. On Ozempic, I would say I needed almost 50% less insulin than I used to need for meals, which is pretty incredible. That's a huge reduction. So I started around 13 units of long-acting insulin. Within a few months of being on Ozempic, I was down to 8 or 9 units. Within the first 2 months on Ozempic, I lost about 10 pounds, which I really didn't need to lose, and it was actually too much. I felt a little like it was too much weight loss. But I never increased my dose after 0.25, so my appetite came back a little bit to just a reasonable place. So I was able to gain back most of that 10 pounds very easily, and that's a weight gain that I wanted. I know most people probably aren't in that situation, but I did find that because I didn't increase the dose of Ozempic, my appetite came up to just a reasonable appetite. It was really refreshing as a type 1 who was always feeling hungry all the time to not have that constant voice of hunger. I'd gotten really good at ignoring that irrational hunger that comes with type 1 diabetes. And that hunger is because you're not producing hormones that tell your brain you're full. I would eat a meal and I would still feel like there was plenty of room in my belly for more food. And I had gotten really good at teaching myself not to listen to that voice. Taking Ozempic makes that hunger voice calm down, go away. It was such a nice thing to not be constantly combating irrational hunger cues. And we shouldn't have to combat and fight against and resist hunger cues all day long. That's why type 1s deserve a drug like Ozempic. At one point, I did try to go up from 0.25 to 0.5 because my doctor, was just following the normal instructions for how you titrate a person's dose up slowly. But at my current body weight, it was too much. My stomach started hurting after anything I ate, even just an apple and peanut butter. It was like, it was just painful. It was like this kind of dull ache all the time after eating. Since I was already seeing results from 0.25, I just figured there was really no reason to increase the dose any further. So I just stayed at 0.25 and I got plenty of benefits from that. My insulin sensitivity continued. The dawn phenomenon problem was just not a problem anymore. I still had a little bit of a rise in the morning, but it wasn't this dramatic 150 points spike within 1 hour of waking up. It just wasn't a big deal anymore. It was manageable and reasonable. And I didn't even need extra insulin most mornings to deal with the little spike that I still was experiencing. In terms of negative side effects, I did feel a little bit nauseous some days, just a little bit, especially in the morning on an empty stomach. Just this general quiet queasiness, but it wasn't every day. There were absolutely moments at a wedding where I would eat what used to be a normal amount of food and I would feel so full that my belly would hurt. And I was like, that was too much food for someone who's taking Ozempic. Even on the lowest dose of Ozempic, it did not take much to feel that was too much, I have many friends who are on Ozempic with type 1 and they're on larger doses because they're looking to lose larger amounts of weight. The friends who have felt the sickest, who have had vomiting or just been unable to eat at all, are on those larger doses. I think if you keep your doses lower, you can get a lot of the blood sugar benefits without all the nausea. It definitely changed the timing of my insulin doses. If you're eating a meal that digests slowly, I did find that I needed to take insulin when I started eating like I normally would, but that I needed to wait a little longer for that second dose because the food is digesting even more slowly than a high-fat, high-carb meal would in the first place. If you take all of your insulin too quickly and you're on Ozempic, you might go low and then spike later because the food's finally hitting your bloodstream. When I stopped taking Ozempic, I had to get used to that again, of how quickly that food was gonna hit my bloodstream, because I didn't have anything to slow down digestion the way I normally should if I didn't have type 1 diabetes. That was frustrating, and it's still frustrating because that's just regular type 1 diabetes. Okay, so my blood sugars were really, I'd say, the same in terms of my A1C, but I think my variability on my graphs was significantly smoother thanks to Ozempic, because I needed less insulin to achieve the same blood sugar levels. My A1C before Ozempic is the same after Ozempic. Ozempic simply made it easier to deal with food because it slows down digestion. I wasn't experiencing these rapid spikes after eating. It was easier to time my insulin with the food. I just felt super sensitive to insulin. Needing less insulin to do the same job is such a relief. It just makes everything easier. That being said, I did have one of the worst lows I've ever had because of Ozempic and because of a mistake I made when dosing insulin for dessert. I think it was a big bowl of Ben & Jerry's ice cream. I took the amount of insulin I would normally take for Ben & Jerry's ice cream. It's very high fat, so it digests very slowly. I knew I needed some insulin when I was eating it, and then I'd need some insulin before going to bed for that long digestion while I'm sleeping. Unfortunately, I took the amount that I used to need for a bowl of Ben & Jerry's before taking Ozempic. This meant I had twice as much rapid-acting insulin in my system for that ice cream. I woke up at like midnight and the room was spinning. I've had a few rough lows in my 25 years, but I've never had one that was quite like this. The room was spinning so much that I felt like the best thing to do was take emergency glucagon, even though I was totally capable of eating. I carefully went down the stairs to the kitchen, gave myself an injection of Gvoke glucagon, a pre-filled syringe. Emergency glucagon tells your liver to release a big dose of sugar to save you from hypoglycemia. But I still didn't feel safe having just taken the glucagon. I knew in my head that the glucagon was probably enough, but I was still really freaked out by how severe this low was. So I ate 2 bowls of cereal on top of the emergency glucagon. It was the only way I was gonna feel safe falling asleep again that night. I woke up the next morning with a blood sugar of 250, which was okay. I wanted to be in the 200s because I was so freaked out by the low. But what it told me was that that extra insulin I took for that ice cream was way too much insulin. If glucagon plus 2 bowls of cereal only brought me up to 250. Taking Ozempic with type 1 diabetes means you need to definitely work with your healthcare team to reduce your insulin doses immediately and gradually too. Your insulin doses are going to continue to come down if your liver continues to produce less sugar. If you lose weight, you become more sensitive to insulin. If you continue to eat less food. Ozempic is awesome if you live with type 1, especially on a really low dose, just to kind of maintain basic insulin sensitivity, hunger cues, suppress your liver's overproduction of glucose. But I ran into a problem: health insurance. I changed jobs, which means my health insurance changed too. I knew my new health insurance was not going to cover Ozempic. I had a hard enough time getting them to cover inhaled insulin. So I weaned myself off Ozempic. The result? It took at least a month to really see in my blood sugars and my insulin needs that I was no longer taking Ozempic. It took a month to see my insulin doses starting to rise and to see that morning dawn phenomenon starting to rise too. I'm still taking metformin, which means my morning dawn phenomenon is still not as dramatic as it was back in the day, but I do miss the Ozempic. I can feel that my appetite is a little feistier. I think about food more. I don't feel as full when I'm eating. My insulin needs have come up a little bit, but not a lot. I did increase my metformin dose to help compensate for the lack of Ozempic. My weight has come up a couple pounds, literally like 2 pounds, which is okay. I can be more diligent about my diet if I need to make sure that 2 pounds doesn't become 5 pounds. The thing I miss most about Ozempic is how it affected my mealtime insulin needs. I definitely need more insulin for my meals. And that's frustrating because it makes it harder to stay on top of the food when you do eat. If I could keep taking Ozempic, I would. I would stay on that low dose for the rest of my life. I'm hoping that I might have the opportunity to take Ozempic again as things become easier, as we become more accepting of the fact that this is a really important drug for people with type 1 diabetes. I don't know when that will be. In the meantime, I'm just gonna keep exercising every day, try to eat mostly whole foods. If you have type 1 diabetes and you're living with obesity, it's definitely easier for you to get Ozempic or Wegovy, which is the same exact drug under a different name. If you have the opportunity and your doctor supports it, it's an amazing drug. I wish I could keep taking it. I'm really glad to hear that there are more companies in the pharma space developing GLP-1s or things like GLP-1s to help people, and I hope that type 1s have the opportunity to try these medications too. But the fact is that there are 5 other hormones that are affected by type 1 diabetes. And we deserve tools to help manage those other hormones. I don't think it should be limited to people who are struggling with their weight. I think even if you're at a healthy weight right now, Ozempic can be so helpful, but it's so hard to get. That's my experience with Ozempic after 1 year. I would keep taking it if I could. Thanks for watching Diabetes Nerd. Find my books on Amazon.